Joseph Lindsley is a traveler and writer and an American reporting on Chicago's WGN radio from Ukraine each and every weekday of Russia's full-scale war. He was once protégé to Fox News founder Roger Ailes, but escaped that frenzied world where power mattered more than truth. And he ended up in Ukraine, a place where truth is valued, where in fact people are prepared to fight and unfortunately to die to be able to express truth, to explore the truth, and share the truth. Joe, welcome back.
Jonathan, greetings from Lviv. Very often when we speak, I'm in Kharkiv, where at any moment a bomb could fall. But now I'm in Lviv, which is pretty calm. And as you gave that introduction, I was thinking, lately I've there's two big thoughts in my mind. One, as people grapple with what is the idea of freedom, and are we losing it? How do we define it all over the world? In our current age, I think Ukrainians have the right to define it because they're willing to die for it, and that's maybe something to talk about. And then the other thing is, you mentioned how I've spoken every single weekday except for like Christmas, holidays on Chicago's WGN radio. I mean, I see it now as like some kind of Lou Gehrig baseball streak because we don't stop. It's 831 days as of today that every weekday I've been doing that, and when a lot of people will say, "Oh, the world gets tired of Ukraine," and in many ways that's true. But what we've done in Chicago with host Bob Surratt and WGN and my reports, we found a way to keep people engaged. And there's a lot of psychology involved in that to really understand and empathize with people. And so I think maybe these are some good things to discuss because I was today as I was reading news about situation with Israel and Gaza. I realized when I'm not there, right? And as a reporter, I'm always skeptical. I want to know more facts and details, so I can understand. Even though I know lots of people there in Israel and Palestine, but I don't feel I have a good grasp of it, and so I can understand why Americans and Brits and others far away from Ukraine might not have a good grasp of this situation, and so that's something that fuels me and sort of steers me as I try to make my daily reports. And I think there's probably good things to discuss now because it's how, especially as we've seen what the Russians have done the past months to Kharkiv city. It's been absolutely terrible, and it took a very due to a focused effort and campaigns of Ukrainians and people that care about Ukraine. That situation seems to be the tide is turning there, and Russians are losing their Kharkiv offensive. But a lot of that is because of how the stories are shared. And I think your channel is always a great place to discuss those ideas.
How's your audience changed? Because you've been doing this, I mean, we're into the third year of the war, and I think very quickly a sort of Ukrainian bubble was established. It's been a challenge, and it remains a challenge to grow that bubble and bring new people into the Ukraine story. What have you found with the sort of ebbs and flows in your audience?
Well, I mean, what I like about WGN Radio has one of the biggest radio towers in America. They reach a lot of the Midwest United States. After my daily live reports, we share it online. We have a very loyal pro-Ukraine audience online, but it's very small. But the actual radio audience is huge, and by all accounts, has been one of the most popular segments, in Chicago radio. Or and the fact, I mean, 10 minutes a day, 7:19 or so every morning, as people are driving to work throughout Midwestern United States, it's a general audience of people that listen to WGN, and they're tuning in and listening to Ukraine. And we've seen like a few times, especially recently, the Russians for the past months have, I mean, there's a lot of good news for Ukraine, but one of the difficult stories, the Russians have pounded Ukrainian infrastructure very precisely. So there's a lot of power problems, a lot of internet connectivity problems. And so in the past several weeks, there have been a couple of times where I could barely do the show due to internet problems. And by all accounts, the station gets flooded with text messages and emails and calls saying, we're worried, what's happening? And so that's a good sign. And the other thing, I always encourage the producers and the hosts to share the negative stuff. People saying, "Oh, we're tired of the story. We don't want to hear it anymore." And whenever the host Bob Surratt reads one of those letters on air, the next day we're inundated by beautiful letters and tributes saying this is a staple of our lives for 2 years now. And so we've shown in Chicago that you can, keep a general audience in America's third biggest city caring about Ukraine. It is possible. And so, I want to see if we can grow that and reach more of that, because we've shown that. And my response to the people that say, enough of this is like, well, it's at the very least, it's not boring, I mean, it's the stories of courage and heroism and fear and trauma and hope and everything, every single day. And so, and I think that's why generally, I mean, that's why that population stays hooked. And the fact that by checking in every day, even it's just for 10 minutes, they feel that they're a part of the story. And that's even spot. I mean, a lot of them donate money. We buy drones and anti-drone equipment and trucks and all kinds of stuff for people at the front line. And some of the WGN listeners even show up here. And so it is just incredibly engaged. And I know people that gather for coffee in Chicago and listen, or they exchange messages afterward. And that's that. So when it's about community, people feel connected, and I think that's part of. I mean, writ large, that's what that's why the Ukraine saga has inspired so many people. It gives them this is a clear, for many people, this is clear good versus evil. You see that here, but even around the world, and it gives them purpose. And in a murky, nasty world of politics and arguing about other stuff, this gives people something, whether you're Republicans or Democrats or whatever, to find clear, simple purpose on. So those people that are sort of the main base understand it. And but now we got the challenge is to work to reach more people that don't quite understand that yet.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's a similar thing in the UK, which was Brexit was incredibly divisive. You were either firmly on one side or the other. It isn't an issue in which you can remain neutral. It's incredibly divisive, but it's also something that energizes debate. Then people became exhausted by it, and Ukraine's come along, and Ukraine is something where you can find commonality with people who you might not agree on other internal issues, but which you can agree on I think we've called it before, the moral unambiguity, the lack of ambiguity in this conflict. There is good, there is evil, there is right, there's wrong, there's a dictator, and there's a democracy. And that should be a narrative that hooks more people in.
Yeah, and then part of the challenge, and I mean, Russian propaganda. I mean, look, first, I was about to say Russian propaganda adeptly manipulates us. But the first thing I think as Americans and Brits and free people, we should realize, this is a lesson that Ukrainians teach us. We are only manipulated if we choose to be manipulated, if we allow ourselves to be manipulated. And this is we have to get back our sense of agency. So I'll say Russian propaganda plays with our willingness to be manipulated. We see politics as a team sport or bloodthirst. We don't want to listen to the other side, and we don't talk to people enough. We don't have the art of conversation. And that, when I see this here with the volunteers that come to Ukraine, whether it's conservative veterans of Afghanistan or liberal Ivy League professors, they find commonality here. I mean, one of the only things where there was a big debate was when, after Hamas attacked Israel and then Israel responded, there was widespread support for Israel within Ukraine, but it was the foreign volunteers who typically were less supportive of Israel, we can say. But generally, you see here, people leave all of their other politics aside, and they just see that this is what freedom is about, and that's so much kind of the wild story of Ukraine. I was at months ago. I was at a concert, an underground concert in Lviv, and it was traditional Ukrainian music. But you had in the audience, you had like purple-haired and pink-haired people, in addition to soldiers and guys missing their legs. And an American volunteer said, "We can't imagine the crossing of paradigms in America. Like this, like tradition and tolerance are like sort of woven together here, and ability to have your own opinion about things and to argue about things. This is so much of what I think we've lost in the U.S. and in particular, and we've lost some mechanisms to bring these things together. But everyone I know that comes to Ukraine sees that and feels it, and this is precisely the model of democracy that Russia is trying to erase. As one of our friends has said, Ukraine is the pointy tip on the spear of freedom. So often we thought of Ukraine as the shield of Europe and all that, but and there's a lot of people lecturing Ukraine about democracy, but when it comes down to it, this is the place where the protest actually worked, right? This is the 2014 Maidan protest, because the people did it in a manner, they weren't burning down their city, they weren't rioting, they were standing together in solidarity, all different religions and ideologies, except again, united against tyranny. And they created this space of 8 years from 2014 to 2022 where Ukraine was flourishing. Like cities like Mariupol became a lovely place. That's now all erased, but you can still see it in Kharkiv. Like everything is clean, and there's people opening businesses even in the wartime. There's this great positive spirit that Ukrainians carved out for themselves, and no other protest movement has been able to achieve that. Whether across all different ideologies. So whether it's yellow vest in France, do those ever work? I mean, maybe they can tweak some policy, but it's not the transformation that people want. The Ottawa truckers protesting against Justin Trudeau's government, that kind of just vanished. Black Lives Matter, was there a great transformation of the culture that they sought? You could say January 6th. I mean, I think it's everyone on all sides, and there's a desire to change things dramatically, on left and right. And you see what Ukrainians did. And I know when I mention all those, it's going to anger each side. And that's how, the fact that I say it, there'll be a ton of comments, which is fine.
Well, that's key, isn't it? That, you're either on one side or the other of those particular events. They don't seek, or most of those events didn't seek some kind of commonality to override the sort of left-right partisan divisions.
Yeah, and this is a lesson I learned in when there was when was that? When they had the Occupy Wall Street protest, and I was in Philadelphia at the time, and I was fresh out of Fox, so I was more anti. In my mind, I thought I was anti that movement, and I went to talk to those people in the protest camps, and we realized like very similar frustrations against basically the elites who want to control things, and I see this. I mean, there's a movement, in America. This is why we see the rise of Robert F. Kennedy too. A movement in America, that people that they feel that they're missing something. That we're missing some of the goodness of life. Everything's too commercialized and corporatized, and they feel that they're just kind of like atoms adrift here, especially with AI and all this. Just overwhelming. And Ukrainians have figured out a way to do this in a cohesive way, where you have a great amount of freedom. I think part of it is actually because they have traditions, because they have ancient songs and rituals that unite them. Then you can have that gives you a comfortable sort of foundation from which you can debate about anything. And so they were able to carve out this society that was truly free. And we could talk about examples of what made you like pieces of evidence why Ukraine was so free. But I think the best indicator of it, like when there's a protest in Paris or Ottawa or Brussels or where in Los Angeles, whatever, or even like look at the protests on university campuses. So I remember in particular the visual of the protest at Emory University in Georgia. So the students and faculty and others, pro-Hamas and Palestine people, were protesting. Whatever you think about it, I'm watching the videos of this, and I see American cops like dragging, middle to older age female university professors, and it just seems ridiculous. Violence on all sides, and you just see society just kind of falling apart, and unable to, with no tolerance for anyone on either side. And that Ukraine, I mean, the Maidan in Ukraine was something so different. I mean, even the fact that as Maidan was more successful, the police disbanded. There were no police in Ukraine, and there was no looting and crime. And so Ukrainians are able to achieve this. But you look at all these other protests around the world, and they're met by the regime in power, panics, they use tear gas, whatever, violence, force. Well, look what's happening here. Ukrainians won for a little bit of time, but now, and this is, I want people to visualize this. Like this is still a protest, and now it's being met with ballistic missiles because the protest was so effective that tear gas didn't work, shooting protesters in the street didn't work, which they tried in 2014, the pro-Putin regime. All these other things didn't work. So the only thing the tyrants can do now, who are so threatened by this freedom, is to send ballistic missiles and bullets and drones every day and night upon this country. And still, still Ukrainians are here.
And it's absolutely fascinating. I was talking to, as you'll know, the video that went out the previous day was Kevin Leach. And one of the things we're discussing was the idea of an authoritarian toolkit. And we see what's unfolding in Georgia. We see what actually is unfolded in many countries. Russia and other autocracies have created a set of techniques, a set of political technologies and the instruments to help regimes that want to erode democracy, that wants to erode institutions. We see Serbia has gone down that route some time back. Hungary's gone down that route. Slovakia is partially going down that route. And there are distinct things they do. You increase the effectiveness of informal networks, mafia networks, so you can erode rule of law and standard business practice. You diminish the power of institutions, the police, and so on. You question the media. You question its honesty. Actually, a lot of this stuff is in the Trump playbook. Let's be quite honest here. He's also taking some of these tools from the authoritarian playbook, I think, beyond a doubt. But one of the key bits is the foreign agents law. It is trying to regulate or even crush and stifle any kind of civic society movement. And ostensibly, they're targeting ones that are funded from outside the country or part funded. But actually, we know that this is part of a broader crackdown. So there's an authoritarian toolkit. Shouldn't we be asking ourselves the question, where is the democratic toolkit to fight back and arm people against these processes?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that is not in America. I think we become authoritarian. I mean, I think junior authoritarian. It's on the spectrum. But I think the answer lies in Ukraine, and this is it's so painful now for so many Ukrainians. In fact, they're still under martial law. They realized that was necessary. Conscription on the streets. Now it's becoming more common. They hate these things. They hate them, but they don't. But now, and after 2 years of this, and with slow trickle of support from the West, there's not much choice. There hasn't been much choice. Maybe with some recent developments, this can change. But I've talked with a lot of Ukrainians and Ukrainian philosophers, and including soldiers, who they hate authority. Really, they like moral authority, but they hate political authority. But they've had sort of an agreement to honor it and respect it these past years, just so they can have more cohesiveness to stay together. But it's just not in their DNA. And everywhere you go in Ukraine, you hear people arguing and complaining about the government, the president, everything, because that's who they are. They haven't lost that. And it's a painful thing for them to lose that now. But they also see, we could lose everything, as they have in some cities. I think we look at America now. I mean, this, but a little bit what bothers me about the American media in general, is they don't connect things. They act like everything is totally separate. Journalists should be interested and curious and say, "Oh, this is weird and interesting." So, like, obviously, last week we had I lose sense of time in the war. Usually when I'm in Kharkiv, it's how many missile attacks ago. But I've been away from that for a few weeks. So, but we had President of the United States, former President of the United States, and current candidate convicted in the court in New York. And then a few days later, you see stories, unprecedented, of course, right? And then a few days later, you see stories about the son of the sitting vice president appearing in court under charges, and the first lady attended. And none of those stories mention the fact that, a few days ago, the former president was convicted, and now the current president's son. And I don't understand why we don't even, no one's even, it's almost like we can't even make these connections. We read we look at one story, and then we hop to another universe. But if we can look at and say, wait a second, let's step back and look at all these things. It looks like we're collapsing all around, just even the optics of it. It doesn't look like a healthy society. It looks like the banana republics we used to decry. Then you see this increasing, and I remember this from, I guess, was it Trump's campaign for the 2016 election, like lock her up. Like, and when I heard that, I said, you better be careful saying that, because once you get into that, then that it's just going to escalate, and every side do it. So,
but even if we take those legal processes at face value and say, well, actually, this is the workings of the rule of law. I mean, we can't discount that there may be genuine charges here, and everyone should be equal under the law. I mean, this is one bit I find interesting about the US system, is that when you reach a certain level of privilege and authority, you seem to start to be able to circumvent the rules that apply to everybody else. That's rather odd, given that, Britain, which was a very hierarchical society, and to an extent, you have a lot of nepotism and you have aristocracy. If you commit a crime, well, these days, more or less everyone, well, yeah, I say that. But ideally, everyone's going to get judged. But if you take those processes at face value, it's still unprecedented that, key public figures are actually finding themselves in legal processes, and ostensibly committing crimes. That's also a sign of corruption and decadence.
Well, yeah, but I think if you look at, and this is one thing I think they garnered a lot of sympathy for Trump, actually, because like the 34 counts, and each count, and this, Brits are better, and Scandinavians are definitely better about this, but Brits are better. The American justice system is puritanical and punitive. It's never about rehabilitation or fixing things, and so 34 counts, each one carrying multiple year sentences that you just tack on to each other. This is because it's about a former president, everyone sees it, but this, there are many people with no not great means, who haven't done anything extremely terrible, like some minor drug offenses, who suffer under the system all the time, and there's just no way out of it. And and it shows you, if you're someone that's not favored by prosecutors or the system in your state, that can be used as a tool against you, whether you're powerful or not. And I know many people that have been working to reform this for a while, but it is very in keeping with our puritanical roots in America. It doesn't sound, there's no idea of let's rehabilitate things, let's improve things. And this, you have similar problems. Like, in Ukraine, there have been some corruption scandals these past 2 years, and then the guys that were dismissed from government, what happened? Do they pay a fine? Are they in jail? No, it's just quiet. And but on the good side of it, here in Ukraine, you see there have been a few times, especially in 2022, when the government made actions against leading volunteers and said, oh, we need to stop you. They said, kind of similar things. They said, your paperwork was wrong or something, and society said, no, hell no. It's like the old idea of jury nullification. It's the Maidan nullification in Ukraine. That's the final check on authority, and that's the unique thing about Ukraine, is that the people actually, like, if you've proven yourself to the people, even the people in your community, that's a protection that you have here. Now, it's not it's not precise rule of law, not at all, because it's a check of the it does sound a little bit like mob rule. But that's what Ukrainian, and that's why I think Ukraine is such a different form of democracy. Like it's the Maidan. It's a check on the government, the ultimate check. And I think from our Western ideas, we think of this as mob rule. But if you look at like the ancient, Scandinavian governments, the thing they would call it, right? The parliament. I think the Danish parliament is still called something. It sounds like the thing, right? Thing. Where the people just gathered on a hilltop. That's the Maidan of Ukraine. That's what we see in Georgia, where they tried to go against the system, and so far they've not been able to stop it. That's what they tried to do in Hong Kong. I mean, when I read about Hong Kong, and just note that I'm mystified that people don't make a connection between Hong Kong and Ukraine, for example. But the people that were protesting in Hong Kong, up until the pandemic, when the pandemic was used to stop them, they would wave British flags, Hong Kong flags, American flags. They often had the 1776 American flag and the Ukrainian flag, and they used the Ukraine's Maidan revolution as their playbook. This is, and I know a lot of these people, or some of these people, who are now in exile, and who some of them were imprisoned. They look to Ukraine as the example, but all that's gone now. Now, I just saw a video from Hong Kong the other day. I think yesterday was the anniversary of Tiananmen Square massacre, and that up until 2020, that was a massive commemoration in Hong Kong because they still had freedom, per the deal, the handover treaty with the UK. And so you go to the optics of from 2020 and now to 2024, one man in the street saying nothing but writing the numbers of the date in the air with his finger. That was it. Immediately swarmed by police and silenced and stopped. And that is deeply connected to the story here in Ukraine. The Hong Kongers knew that. Ukrainians, amazingly against the odds, achieved what they did in 2014. They sort of built it up for 8 years. And now that's the very thing that's under existential threat. And if Ukraine's example of freedom, of defiance, of petty tyranny and high level tyranny, all kinds of tyranny, if that's erased, there is no other example in the world of people succeeding against that, against people that want to control them. There's not. I don't think there is. If there is, please, I hope people comment.
No, I mean, you have to go back a long way into history to find something I think as momentous as that. Even beyond, the 1960s student protests, maybe the Prague Spring is comparable, but of course that was crushed by the Soviet Union. Yeah, I'd say Prague Spring is about the most comparable thing, but it was only allowed to flourish once the Soviet Union had collapsed and crumbled and couldn't exert its control over Eastern Europe any longer. It's interesting that Ukrainians are quite humble. I asked at an event in London last year, there was the Ukrainian historian Serhiy Plakhy, who has written extraordinary books about Ukrainian history as well as other stuff, and a fantastic book about Russian nationalism as well, actually, one of his lesser-known books, but it's extraordinary insight into the mechanics of the Russian imperial mindset. And I asked him whether Maidan will come to be seen as a great historical turning point, an inflection point, like the revolutions of 1848 and other pivotal moments in history. And I think that he literally in front of this audience said, "I'd never thought of it like that before, but maybe," he said, I'll take that away and think a bit further. So I think there's a degree of humility to Ukrainians who they know this is their revolution. They don't perhaps realize that it's of historical importance.
Well, and I think part of it is the media and certainly Western leaders never talk about Maidan. Because you can't imagine President Macron of France, praising Maidan when he, can't handle the yellow vest or whatever whatever movements are happening there. It is a threat. Maidan is a threat to everyone in power. I mean, even the Ukrainian government doesn't talk about it. Because the Maidan is not about the government. The leaders of the Maidan did not go into government afterward. It wasn't that type of revolution. They said, no, we want to do our own thing. And what Maidan created was a ghost check. It's always there. It's like a ghost. And the government knows they can kind of start to read the mood of the people. I mean, this happened in we've seen so many stories, especially lately, about those so-called negotiations in the early months of the full-scale invasion, and allegedly Boris Johnson, was the one guy that told Ukraine to fight. And if it weren't for him, they would have negotiated. But if you look more closely, there was, and maybe it was April of 2022. It was whenever the Grammys was that year, or some ceremony like that, because President Zelensky started to say, hey, maybe there could be some negotiation maneuverability regarding Crimea. He was testing the idea. And for the first month or so of the full-scale invasion, there was great cohesion in society, no criticism. But then people began to mumble, wait, we don't want this. And there was a Ukraine's basically the poet laureate of Ukraine. She she had performed maybe a few weeks before at the Grammys with John Legend. So she's at this world level stature when the whole world's paying attention to Ukraine. And she used that position she directly on social media criticized President Zelensky. She could do it because of her position, but and the spirit of Ukrainian resistance. But her voice encapsulated what everyone else was saying, and the government knew, okay, that's the Maidan speaking. Get back in the program of the people. And this gets missed entirely because we hear, and this is why I don't even like it's just reporters conventions. They're like, I saw this in the Daily Mail. I see it all the time. Other places like President Zelensky's forces or Kyiv's forces. No, it's not. It's the people that insist upon this. And if the government ever doesn't want to do that, then they're gone. And even in this, I mean, even in this difficult phase, when there's many Ukrainians face the idea they might be mobilized. So that means these are people that they don't feel that they don't see themselves as warriors because they haven't signed up for it yet. And that but you just understand it. This is the price of it, and for many it's a little bit depressing sometimes, but they can't imagine another reality. And that's it's especially if we look at the city of Kharkiv. It's Ukrainians are almost a different species of humanity in their insistence on being free. The city of Kharkiv, which the past several days, Kharkiv is calmer. Because ever since Washington gave the green light for Ukraine to use some of those weapons from the U.S., we can see there's a decline in Russian attacks. But before that, a month and a half, Jonathan, I've never heard people more on edge in Kharkiv than they were because it was so intense. And then still, I had a friend and his wife. She gave birth to a baby in the hospital that the Russians often hit nearby. And for the rest of us, we'd say, you could go, you don't even have to go to Europe. Just go to Kyiv or Lviv. No, we stay in Kharkiv. And they take the kid out to the park that gets bombed all the time. We don't understand this because we're used to comfort and other things as our main principles. Ukrainians are like the true radical, almost you could say insane believers in freedom.
There's also the media. Let's turn to the change in attitude, and unfortunately, it's not a full 360-degree change because clearly escalation management is still a factor, and there's still sort of red lines being drawn all over the place. But there's been a little easing of that in reaction to the Kharkiv offensive that you talked about. But the media seems to swing between adulation and despair. When they're not totally ignoring Ukraine. 1 minute, Russia's going to crumble, it's all over, etc. The next minute, Ukraine's done, it's going to be overrun. These extreme narratives have always seemed to be unrealistic ever since the siege of Kiev was broken. And I know there are complexities and there's difficulties with mobilization. There are shortages of manpower. There are shortages of trained and skilled soldiers in the Ukrainian army. But the media just doesn't seem to be able to calibrate and comment on what's going on in a way that I find it deeply disengaging. I will switch off because I don't feel I'm reading or hearing any version of the truth that I recognize.
Yeah, Jonathan, I feel the same way because I'm here every single day. And I read the accounts of this and I say, well, that's not reflective of the reality I see. And for one, most stories miss entirely the big psychological drama, that everyone goes through because they don't take time to go into that. Because even while you want to, say you stand for freedom, it doesn't mean it's easy. So it misses the human psychological level, and then just tries to paint things in very simple strokes. I think a lot of this is the arrogance of media to say, oh, well, I've visited there a few times. I can tell you exactly what's happening. But a lot of times there's a lot of ambiguity. We have successes in the Black Sea, which is extraordinary. Ukrainians have made it so dangerous for Russian ships to be in the Black Sea. Ukrainian drones are able, have taken out Russian oil refineries, which, and by the way, more and more I hear that just to the level that is angering people in Washington, and they're trying to limit Ukrainians on that. And it gets to this idea of just keep your freedom in check. And then, of course, we've had the difficult stuff. We saw in Kharkiv region, and this, it's. I mean that's the very reason. I mean, why it's crazy, but why I stay here all the time, because you have to feel it and understand it to share it with the world, and to say, um, you know, first it's about the people. It's not about the politicians, and that's something you only get by traveling the country and knowing the mood of the people you encounter. Um, and I think for example, that's why I never really report numbers of fatalities on either side, because I know often I have a better picture of the reality, but not total. You just know it from being here. But it's not about that, right? These are all steps toward victory. It's like when Ukrainians used a drone to hit a Russian oil refinery like 1,200 kilometers deep into Russia. Now that's kind of becoming more common. And the BBC headline was about how many Russians were injured or killed in that, ignoring the extraordinary thing that really is the headline, that Ukrainians were able to send this drone all the way deep into the Russian Federation. But the media, like, they want to, talk about it like we're on ESPN or something, like, tit for tat and how many are killed. Or we talk about how many, when a Russian ship is sank, Ukrainians sink a Russian ship with sea drones in the Black Sea. The top thing that the media gives us is, how many Russians were injured or killed. We can't trust anything out of Russia because there's no free press. They imprisoned the Wall Street Journal reporter, etc. But B, they never mention, oh, wait, this ship was likely responsible for the loss of X amount of lives in Ukrainian cities because it was firing missiles upon these cities. They don't even tell us that. And so if you're sitting far away, and this is part of why I realize when I read the coverage of the stories about Israel and Gaza, I know that I don't have a picture of that like I have a picture of this. And I even see how that colors my mood. Like today, I was reading stories about Rafa's situation, and in my mind, I'm like, you know what? It's just all around. It sounds like a mess. Every side, I don't, this is what my mentality is. I don't want to think about it. It's a mess. It's complicated. And I realize as I'm saying that, that's what so many people are saying about Ukraine, and this is what Russian propaganda strives to do, to make it confusing, to make it messy, to make it sound dirty. Like, I don't want to deal with this. So they killed Russians with their drones, and then you just get sucked into that, and you don't see the bigger picture, and of what this is about. And part of that bigger picture, for example, is those who were killed. Well, this is the damage that they were doing, so this is what they would have kept doing. And this is, how we get out of that is, I mean, I think a lot of it's programs like yours. It's, me reporting every day for 10 minutes. If people want to feel the mood of what it's like to be here, but I think first you have to decide, there was a Ukrainian medic named Cheka. That was her nickname. Cheka is like part of the grenade device. And that was her nickname. She was killed, I think it was last week in Kharkiv region. And she was 25. She was killed. She was killed maybe several days before her 26th birthday.
It's Irina, wasn't it? Irina Tsimbo.
Irina, yes, Irina Cheka. And she, in fact, there was, I mean, she knew things were intense, and she made a video saying that if she's killed, while tending to wounded soldiers, she asked for people to gather and sing traditional songs in her honor. And so thousands of people gathered at the Maidan, the true democratic heart of Ukraine, in Kyiv, and sang these traditional songs in her honor. And she, not long before she died, she wrote these powerful reflections about war, but not just war in general, about this war and about freedom. And she said, the only choice is freedom in a country where there is war. And the only story is about Volia, that Ukrainian word. So there's two words for freedom: Svoboda, which is freedom as we would kind of just define it, I think, most of us, and then Volia, which is the deep will to be free. And like will, like the deepest sense of free will is really what it is. And she said the only story in this country at war is about the Volia and the fight for this Volia. And she says, she said, look, there's a lot of things she wants. She says, I want to have children. I want a house. I want to plant tomatoes. But ending the war, protecting this Volia, our will to be free, is the most important thing. And she said, she started talking about storytelling, and we need a memory strategy. We need to tell people why we're willing to fight and die for this, so that doesn't get lost. And then she says, the stories are meant to teach us to fight for justice, to punish evil, and to sacrifice ourselves for others. And I see this so much with Ukrainians who were raised on their stories and stories of good versus evil. But even the fact that they love Tolkien, because these stories always resonated with them. And growing up with those stories, it's not just entertainment. It prepared them for this moment. And a lot of people in the West, and I talk with powerful Republicans who say, Joe, we don't like it when we hear the Ukrainians say orcs. It just sounds stupid, and the evil monsters from Tolkien. And like, yeah, but they recognize the truths of these fairy tales, that this is actually good versus evil. And when you think of someone like Cheka, I mean, and you see the tributes made to her, she looks like a character from a fairy tale, because she got to that level of heroism. And Ukrainians were prepared by these stories of good versus evil to meet this moment, and you need that. And I think it's one thing that does mystify me a bit. And we look at our love for like Marvel movies, good versus evil movies in America. And we sit eating popcorn, watching this, and feeling good emotions about it. But is that it? Is that our life? Just watching this stuff vicariously? And that's kind of what people have been doing here. And now they're not even doing that. They're continuing to watch the movies, but ignoring the real movie, the real reality of good versus evil here. And I think our media doesn't portray that drama of it. They don't. And maybe it's part of it's a desire to say, well, I need to, be removed emotionally to be a fair reporter. I think that is probably a big part of it. I don't have a problem with that. I think because if you're a reporter, you have to believe in free speech. You have to. You have to be a partisan of free speech. And so at the very least, and if you're neutral on that, then I can't accept your reporting. So that's why I think I feel freer to share the stories of good versus evil that I see here. So anyway, I don't know if that.
I think that's interesting. I think this is something we can explore in the next episode, because I know outside of recording, we've had conversations about, these changes in the media landscape. But I'm having more and more people who watch Silicon Curtain, watch Jake Bro, and others, saying that actually these are places where they feel there is it's not journalism, but it's sort of activism with an attempt to be objective. And I think that that's one of the weaknesses of legacy media, is it has purged itself of any semblance of activism. And if people display those qualities, well, they're kind of moved out. It's become very sterile and bureaucratic. And actually, I think in the UK, you are seeing quite a number of senior journalists and figures go into podcasting, go into mediums where they can explore topics in greater depth, but without those kind of restrictions, and where they don't have to pretend they're not human and don't have their own sort of political urges, their own prejudices, but also their own desire to change things.
Yeah, but even those journalists who, and I saw this because I worked at Fox News, protégé Roger Ailes, who think that they are, being very neutral, and every journalist knows this. Every good journalist everyone who desires to be a good journalist knows this. There's always a story that you try to push the boundaries and say, wait, let's investigate this question. And you said, no, you can't do that, by the corporate bosses. And so they live in this fake sense of we're neutral. They're not. They're actually pushing, every time you use the passive voice and say rockets hit Ukraine, you're not being neutral. You're being pro-Russian. You're not saying the agent of who did what. That's why I encourage everyone, when you read stories, look for the use of the passive voice. And that's precisely where the journalist is not doing his or her job. They're either echoing propaganda or refusing to say X did that, who did what. That's the job of the journalist, is to investigate that stuff and to make it clear. That's part of the reason why the stories are boring, because they're all passive. But you see this everywhere. Or it's like the top American reporter I know. I think we probably talked about this, but in Kharkiv, who said several months ago to me in a coffee shop while drinking a fancy latte in this lovely city under siege, loudly said this to me in the coffee shop. It's too bad that these people don't know that their city's lost to Russia. That this is not neutral reporting. It's not reflecting the mood of the people in the city. You're disconnected from it, and I think that's why I think the best thing, one thing reporters can do is to make sure you share the moods of the people around you. You have to listen to people. You need, and I've been reading this work on empathy by, I don't know if we talked about this because it's been a while since we talked, but Edith Stein, the brilliant philosopher, who she was in the School of Phenomenology. She studied at the University of Freiburg under Herschel, and School of Phenomenology is like analyzing how we process experience, how our minds process experience. So this is the early 20th century. It was actually maybe a visionary field because it prepared us for the age of mass media. We were constantly inundated by noises and sounds. I mean, just look at think of it, all the things we see every day. And this is the study to analyze and understand that, and that, our conversations with someone, our dreams that we have while sleeping, the stuff we see in media, all of this forms our identity and who we are. And so she wrote this book on empathy to attempt to create a structure to analyze that, how we're affected by it. And philosophy was very powerful. She became a Catholic nun because she wanted to serve the poor. And while being an academic, so she was born Jewish, Catholic nun, female academic. On all counts, Hitler the Nazis could not tolerate any one of those, especially all together. She was killed in Auschwitz. But she was made one of the 6 patron saints of Europe. I think the only one from the 20th century. And I've been going back to read her idea on empathy because I think it's the only way that we can get out of our political divisions. And I see that in Ukraine. I see, especially in the wartime, but they had it since Maidan, but especially now, everyone has an incredible sense of empathy, and that makes cooperation possible, even in small, seemingly stupid ways, like in Kharkiv or Kyiv after a night of missile attacks. So you go to your coffee shop, and let's say the barista forgets your order. You're going to be patient because you know that person has gone through pretty much exactly the same stuff that you went through a few hours before. The fear, the bombings, the noise, everything. And this creates this, all of a sudden it creates a possibility that people can work together and collaborate together and understand each other. So if we can get empathy within our society, but then especially, I think, not especially, but also empathy in our storytelling and reporting. And that means stop using the passive voice. Listen to the people. This is what they're saying. That is anyway. That from here in Ukraine, I think that empathy is ultimately the key, the way to get out of this.
And another way in which, unfortunately, Russian coercive manipulation works is in creating this idea of Russia that is inevitable, invincible, and eternal, which means that no matter how badly they do on the front lines, you almost sort of look at Russia as if, well, it's never going to go away. It's never going to stop. It's relentless. Therefore, why resist it? It's almost like the sort of philosophy of surrender. But unfortunately, that percolates down into the media. It percolates into geopolitic discussion and certain realist theories, certainly. But it also seems this coercive manipulation does seem to affect foreign policy as well. When you combine it with the nuclear threat, we see that in particular, Jake Sullivan, people he's advised by, including Samuel Charap and others, are definitely informed by this view, but don't realize that it is highly manipulative, highly intentional to change their behaviors. And it's tricky, isn't it? Because we started talking about, this is the kind of last question to end on. We started talking about changes in not just US policy, but Berlin policy to allow Ukraine to hit Russian troops in Kharkiv. But the coercive manipulation and these tropes around Russian invincibility still mean these red lines are being painted all over the place. Is Ukrainian victory really dependent on moving away from this mindset.
Yes, absolutely. And then and here, I mean, not forgetting that idea of empathy. First, to understand how difficult it is, especially from far away, to not be afraid of these threats, to understand them. And I mean, every single person I know here, and I'd say this is true for me too. You have moments when you say, geez, I don't know if this could work. Everyone has moments of depression and heaviness where there's too much. What's the point? Do we really need this freedom? Maybe we just imagine live in some gray Soviet hellscape for the whole world, like Hong Kong now. Maybe we do that, and you think that for a few seconds and you talk to people, and then that's where people say, come on, no, all right, it's understandable to be depressed a little bit. It's heavy and difficult. And that's where you find your hero courage and keep going. So I'll say, I understand the mentality that comes from that place of fear, or and saying, well, come on, is it really worth it to have this type of freedom? But that's why being here is sort of a guardrail against letting that govern your entire pattern of thinking, because people find courage with each other here. That's why I love being in the city of Kharkiv. Kharkiv shows us more than anything. I mean, a month ago, the narrative was, oh, Kharkiv, probably going to fall. The Russians were pushing this. People are going to start fleeing Kharkiv. I mean, the Russians hit, the basically equivalent of Costco or Home Depot on a Saturday afternoon. An hour later, they hit a park and trying to make it untenable there. And yet the people stay, and the parks are still filled with people. They're showing us, I don't know if it's micro or macro, it's like macro courage in a micro spot that it's possible to resist. And now we see, I mean, we've seen what Ukrainians have done with the Black Sea, the Russian fleet. We see what Ukrainians have done taking out Russian oil depots, and they could do a lot more if people in Washington weren't scared about oil prices and other things. But just look at what's happening now. Up until 4 days ago, it was like an average of 80 to 95 precision bombs hitting Kharkiv region and Kharkiv city. Russians, I use the passive voice, Russians hitting Kharkiv region with precision guided bombs. And now that number is reduced by about 30 on average per day. We see fewer attacks in Kharkiv city. So if we have a mentality of like working with what's possible, and the mentality of let's come from a place of courage and looking at what's possible, we see America taking some of the shackles off of Ukraine, allowing them to use HIMARS but not ATACMS. We've seen Kharkiv become more protected. In the same way that we've seen Odessa. A month and a half ago, Odessa was being pummeled by the Russians almost every day. It was very intense. No one talks about it now, but that's not happening to the same degree. Because America down there, Ukrainians could use ATACMS to hit the launch points in Crimea and the Black Sea. And we see, oh, wait, we're getting these successes. And what is Russia's response? They're not nuking us. Russia has to regroup and think of new things. And every time that we start to get these successes, then there's no pressure, there's no talk about it, and it gives Russia time then to get stronger again. But we actually see Russia getting weaker during those times. And so I think that's, to really precisely pay attention to these moments, and just, when, like today, when I'm going on the radio, there was no major attack. I think this might explain it. I'm a journalist who's got to speak every day. And okay, you get tired, you got to go, you have no choice. It's easier to report if there's a lot of bad shit that happened. And I'm looking into the news. Oh, what, and I was caught in this mentality today, Jonathan. I'm like, oh, I'll just be very honest so people know what it's like as a journalist, and maybe this explains our media. I'm, rushing to get on air, and I'm like, wait, what? Was there any big bombs or any big shit to talk about? Was there any big horrible thing? And there wasn't. And then, so if I didn't have this commitment to do this every day, I might say, oh, let's skip Ukraine today because it wasn't anything hugely bad. But then I'm like, no, this is a huge success. After all the 2 months of hell we've gone through, a lot of it which I personally experienced in Kharkiv, but this is a big success. Now, the challenge is to tell that in a very human way that's relatable and interesting. To say all is calm, it could be boring to people that are used to violence, but that's actually the most important time to tell the story, because that's where we begin to say, hey, this is working, and we don't have to be afraid of the big bad wolf. And as the leader of the defense committee of the Bundestag, the German parliament, I forget her name, she was asked, what happens if, when if Western fighter jets start shooting Russian planes? And the question is asked from this perspective of like, oh, are we going to get nuked, or Russia going to hit London? And the leader of the defense committee of the German parliament said, no, it simply means there'll be one less Russian plane. And if you can, and this is the Ukrainian mentality, it's the Kharkiv mentality of the mother that after a missile attack is walking through the park with her kid in the stroller. That mentality, that's what defies tyranny and defies fear.
I saw that story kind of made me chuckle. That's also, that flippancy is how you fight authoritarians. They hate satire. They hate to be mocked. They hate not to be thought of and talked about. And in some ways, this entire war is like the most monumental, terrorist toddler tantrum in history. It's like, notice me, notice me. But, Russia can only do it through violence and aggression. And Ukraine, however, has another story to tell. And I think that's the powerful thing. It has a story, as you say, about freedom, about agency, about cooperation, about innovation, invention, trust. These, however, are complex and don't make their way into news coverage.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, and I saw this at a gathering of friends over the weekend in a village, people having a barbecue, and everyone has got very tough stories, and everyone's resigned to the fact, even here in Lviv, especially in Kharkiv, that you're going to die. Well, we're all going to die. We want to forget that, but war makes that very clear. It's more imminent, but we're all going to die anyway. And so here, you really accept it, and it does. It changes how you live, and this is. It gives you this ability to do things you never thought were possible. That's the challenge, to get people in leadership in the West to feel that. I think that's probably the reason why we see so much frustration with governments around the world. They don't have a moral imagination. They don't have a sense of everything's sort of bureaucratic management of stuff and keeping themselves in power. But what's the dream and what's the vision? And but the only thing that can counter the nuclear fear is some kind of noble dream and vision and sense of, that's it, I think. And this is why this story, as Cheka the medic said, some of her last words, here's someone who's dealing, with violence and death and horrible things every day. And her last message was, we need stories. We need stories of good versus evil. This is what we see every day here. We need to inspire people's imagination to believe it. And, she gave her life for that, but giving her life isn't just the moment of dying. It was the life that she lived. Her leg, she gave her life to this planet, to the idea of humanity, in a way that doesn't go away. And that's, I don't know. The more we hear stories like that, maybe it can give courage to people, to people far away in Washington. And but I think that's what it comes down to. It's our thumos, our spirit. Do we believe? Are we nihilist, or do we believe in something? How do we want to live?
And I think that's what your channel does. That's what a lot of activists have discovered in this period, that despair is not going to lead to change. But if confronted with that, then taking action is the thing that not only helps you deal with the emotional and physical trauma, but also that sense of purpose. And then Ukraine shows that you can actually, through that organization, actually effect some change. But Joe, it's been fantastic having you back on the channel. I know the audience look forward to these. I think this was a fantastic conversation, inspiring conversation. Thanks so much for doing what you do and for coming back on Silicon Curtain.
Jonathan, thanks. I always appreciate these conversations. It helps me sort out a lot of things, and I welcome people to follow us at UkrainianFreedomNews.com. We're delivering supplies all the time to the front, and you can find my daily reports in Chicago's WGN Radio on YouTube and Instagram, Twitter, everything accessible via UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Thank you, Jonathan, from Lviv.